afternoon, and welcome to Robbing Minds. My name is Isabella Adediji. Today, we kick the show off with news from the front page. Very recently, the president announced local government autonomy. But when we look at some of the elections that have held across different states in Nigeria, like Kano, like Edo, you find that a single party sweeps all the seats, like the local government elections in Rivers easily comes to mind. What does this say about local government autonomy? Joining me for this conversation is a lawyer, Justice Ogieno. Justice, welcome to Robbing Minds.
Isabella, it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's go right into the conversation with local government autonomy. I'm sure you've been following some of these elections happening, and what we're seeing is a rinse and repeat as we have in the past years. So what does it say about local government autonomy? Is this just something on paper that hasn't quite translated into the polity?
Okay, I solidly think that it has not translated. It has never translated in the past, and it's looking like it will never ever translate from what we have seen a person to the antecedents of, especially the governors and their role in the purported autonomy of the local government. There was a last-ditch effort so far by the Supreme Court of Nigeria to, through the back door, try to ensure that the local governments get some form of financial autonomy, which is the most important autonomy so far as I'm concerned. But again, is that the best way to achieve it? I know that it's a desperate effort by the federal government, and that's why the Attorney General instituted a suit earlier this year that actually said that it is unlawful and unconstitutional for the governors to practically be in charge of local government financing. But we know from being a constitutional law student in the University of Lagos, I took on one of my lecturers. His name is Dr. Akinola Akitayo, when he was trying to tell us that there are 3 tiers of government in Nigeria, pursuant to our constitution. I told him no, as a student, more than a decade ago, and the situation remains the same. The best way to actually ensure that, in fact and indeed, there's autonomy for the local government in Nigeria is to ensure that the provisions of the constitution is amended to that effect, particularly the provisions of section 7 sub 1 of our constitution and the various other provisions of our constitution that actually allows the state government and the local government to have a shared joint account.
Well, surely financial autonomy is the main one, because if the local government can control its finances, then there is that independence. There's not waiting for the state government to give their blessings, so to say. So if that is in place, why are we seeing the state machinery still at work, where in an election we're seeing a clear sweep? Does it mean that we're not getting enough participation? Is that what it's pointing to? Or is it pointing to the state machinery being at play?
I think it's the state machinery being at play. It is practically impossible, and it goes to show clearly that it has always been a charade, especially when it comes to local government elections. Because how do you logically explain a situation where before a person becomes governor, it is neck and neck, meaning that 2 political parties actually slugged it out, meaning that one party has a stronghold within the state. And when it's now time for local government elections, we now see a situation where one party carries everything, carries the day unanimously. I was laughing when I saw the Rivers State election. It was 22 out of 23. And for me, I was like, how can Simfubara not even get 23 out of 23? When it is the history of our country that all governors get 23 out of 23. But again, it may be to show that, okay, it was indeed free and fair, and people actually competed, and that was why they could win the other one. But generally, we see that the governor is the one that appoints the head of the state electoral body, whatever it is named in various states. And that is the challenge. They pick their henchmen. In Kano, some court actors, Federal High Court, had to make several decisions declaring the chairmanship of that particular chairman of the electoral body in Kano illegal. So he was removed from being the chairman, and some other candidates too were declared illegal to be there. But again, we now saw that some state courts came up and actually gave a directly conflicting decision to that of the Federal High Court. The election wasn't supposed to really hold, but eventually now it held because of conflicting judgments of both the Federal High Court and the State High Court, which is a matter for another day. I invite the leaders of the judiciary that this is an emergency situation that we have to really, really quickly take care of and nip in the bud. Otherwise, we'll have a situation where there may be chaos, because the judiciary, as we must be reminded, is the last bastion that is holding law and order in place in any country.
But I want you to also look at the voters. A lot of times, the local government elections does not receive the same kind of attention that the general elections receives, or even the gubernatorial elections receive. And as a result, we don't see as much people, whether it's on social media or on the streets, campaigning for their councillor, campaigning for their local government chairman. So could the blame also be put on voter apathy? Could it also be that, I don't know, when last did you vote in a local election? Let's start with that.
Don't put me on the spot. Isabella, that's very, very unfair. I feel that, well, it's been a while. I think it's the penultimate one, not the last one. I didn't participate in the last one because it was almost certain who the winner was going to be. So that was why I didn't bother participating in the last one. And it's because of the lack of confidence I suffered in the penultimate one. So having said that, I think that Nigerians should share maybe the to your tent, O Israel attitude that I'm exuding in this regard. And how do you get to blame them? If the governor has already said, this is the candidate from my party, why should I, if I'm not going to just give my imprimatur in line with what the governor has already said, why am I bothering myself? Because the outcome is already decided in some parts of some secretariat of some office. We saw how brazen this was when the chief of staff to Governor Rotimi Amechi of the Times openly came on air to say it, that they decide, as the chief of staff, they decide who emerges as local government chairman in their respective states. And he was using that to indict fellow chiefs of staffs or fellow governors in other parts of the country. So why should Nigerians bother themselves? Having said this too, we pray that with the autonomy, in quote, that the federal government is trying to bring in through the back door, through the Supreme Court, that it actually comes to play. And as much as possible, I urge and encourage Nigerians that no matter what these politicians do, we mustn't lose faith. We must still keep participating in democratic activities.
But, you mentioned democracy, and if democracy is of the people, by the people, for the people, why are we still seeing that not enough people are coming out for these elections? Could it be that we don't value the seat of the local government? Could it be that our attention is on the state government and the federal government?
And erroneously so. Our attentions have been, most people know their president. Some struggle, yes, they eventually know their governor, but that's about where it ends when it comes to knowledge of, okay, who is even in charge, in a manner of speaking, of my destiny as a Nigerian. We don't know our House of Rep leaders. We never know the local government chairman. It is practically impossible for you to get the average Nigerian to give the first name of who his councillor is. And that's supposed to be the person that is supposed to be closest in the wrong of government in this country. But again, you don't really get to blame the average Nigerian. A lot of confidence and trust has been eroded over the years, not because of their lack of participation or lack of interest, but because of the fact that to a lot of times they have been defied by the resilience of the Nigerian politician that has decided to impose his will at whatever cost on the average Nigerian. We saw the 2023 election, especially at the federal and state levels. And for every Nigerian that for the first time in a long time did not demonstrate so much voter apathy, came out, did everything they could do. They were harassed, they were insulted, they were beaten, some were even slain. Yet they still came out. It would take much more to convince them that let's forget about the past. The future will be better. The future, we trust INEC, we trust Mr. Yakub, we trust every other institution that is supposed to make us have a free and fair election. So that has always been the issue. And if this can be ameliorated, maybe not extinguished, because voter apathy, voter fraud can never ever be extinguished, even in the best places where electoral.
So there needs to be like a restoration of trust so that people can come out to exercise their franchise. Now I want us to move the conversation to the recent cabinet reshuffle. We saw the merging of some ministries, the renaming of some ministries, the creation of new ministries, and that is more of a reflection of, we want to cut down the cost of governance, right? So let us merge some ministries. But then on the same hand, we see the creation of new ministries. What does this tell you about this current administration under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu?
Okay, for me, I think that, well, I'm very happy that at least we're having what's called a cabinet reshuffle. We almost didn't have it in the Buhari government. Even though the president promised us that it was going to take 3 months. It was after 3 months that any minister that doesn't perform is going to be fired. It's better late than never. We had it after 2 years. But where I had challenge was, you fired 5 ministers, you added 7. That mathematics doesn't add up. It means that there is actually an increase from where we are living off. So that said, but I am happy at some persons that have been recruited into the team. For example, the lady in charge of business, watching business, Dr. Jumoke Oduwole, has now been made the substantive Minister of Investment and Trade. I feel that that's a very, very fantastic hire because she has proven her mettle since for about, I think, going on 12 years now. So that's a fantastic hire. And when it comes to maybe a Sunday Dare moved from a substantive minister to a special advisor, there are some things that I may not be able to say because I don't think that's a promotion, that's a demotion. So let's even say that 6 people were fired from being ministers because of him. But some other ministers that were fired, especially the Uju Ohane, I don't know how she stayed that long. I don't know how she made 2 straight years in that office because from the get-go, she has not been a person that I consider befitting for the office of a minister of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, sitting on the table of the Federal Executive Council, maybe bi-weekly or every month, as it is now. It used to be every week. So with such things, I'm not really happy. I just pray that with the best efforts of the president, he feels that, okay, he has now moved to the A team now. The dividends of democracy should be enjoyed by the average Nigerian people. They said they've reduced the number of persons that are following them. They are convoy and
yes, there are aides. But I want you to look at square pegs in square holes. So, for example, you had the Honorable Minister of Health, Dr. Tunji Alausa, being moved to education. So what does that say? We had a health practitioner running a health ministry, and now we see that person in education.
Okay, Isabella, in as much as it is desirable to let a person who actually is a practitioner in a particular field be able to head a cabinet position, that's desirable. But we must also remind ourselves that the work of a minister essentially is administration. I've been in ministries, I've had engagement with ministers. I know that it is a very, very cumbersome one. You must be an ace administrator rather than being an ace in the field where you are in, because essentially what you are called upon to do is to run an army of people and get an army of people to implement the policies of Mr. President or whoever, maybe at the government level, a governor. So you have to be hands-on on that. If you are not very, very good with that, especially with a particular ministry, you should actually be fired. That's generally my take. So now moving the person from a core ministry of his area of competence, which he is supposed to be able to do better in, to another ministry, it leaves a lot to be desired. But again, Isabella, this is politics. There are lots that you and I don't know.
And you mentioned in your earlier answer that yes, we've seen the merging of ministries, but we've also seen, additional ministries. And what comes to mind is this livestock. What's wrong with livestock being under agriculture? Is it necessary to have a specialized ministry as such?
For me, if you ask me simplicity as a Nigerian, I would say no. There is no need for it not to be underneath the Ministry of Agriculture. But we have a situation where it has been an incendiary issue over the years in Nigeria. I think it's even more than a century old now when it comes to the particular issue of farmer-herder clashes. If there is a way to do it in a sense that the average Nigerian will still be able to live in any part of Nigeria where he wants to live, the far-flung places in Benue, far-flung places in Kaduna, far-flung places in Zamfara, without the cattle coming to disrupt the farmlands, I feel that anything and everything we can possibly do to buy that peace, maybe in a political way, let's compromise and just get it done so that we should face development, because we are having a bigger issue on our hand, which is food security. And food security as an issue is caused by these incessant and perpetual clashes. So I feel that anything and everything that we can do in order to make food arrive at on the table of the average Nigerian at the lowest possible cost should be done. And if it means creating this ministry to get that done, I endorse it.
So now let's look at the scorecard. So, there are some ministers that, like you said, you're happy to see them go. But there are some ministers that have remained, and Nigerians are asking questions. For example, let's look at the Ministry of Power. I can't count how many times the grid, has collapsed in the past few weeks, months. And we've seen increased tariffs. Yet it's almost like you're paying more, but getting less. So how come we see the Minister of Power being retained?
Okay, for the Ministry of Power, I feel that it can't be the voice of Nigerians that's still making him retain that office. It must be the voice of some stakeholders that we don't know, because as it is, it has become a cash generating cow for them. Maybe the companies, the GEMCOs, of course, the Transmission Company of Nigeria, and the DISCOs. Maybe it has become a cash cow for them. And the fact that to a large extent, maybe the president is somehow happy because he's not having to pay what they call subsidy on power again because of him being there. Him being there as a bulldog, because I have not even seen a minister that lacks the PR requirements of a person that is seated on the cabinet. This is a minister that just talks practically almost anyhow, with all due respect to him. It was the one that faced Nigerians and told Nigerians to turn off their freezers and turn off. He said we are using our freezers too much. Is that how to talk to a country that is in pain? So I feel that the major reason why he's retaining his office is that the president wants him. Some other IMF, World Bank, and every other person that has been telling the president to deregulate, and they must be the persons preserving him in power. Because if you leave it to the average Nigerian, they cannot wait for him to have packed his bag and left.
Thank you so much, Justice Ojeno. That's all we can take on this segment.
It's my pleasure.